It had been a golden decade for Sunny Hostin. The Emmy Award-winning co-host of The View, lawyer, and author had carefully crafted her public image, elegant, articulate, and fiercely intelligent. From her luxurious home in Purchase, New York, she managed both a high-profile career and a seemingly idyllic family life. Her husband, Dr. Emmanuel Hostin, an accomplished orthopedic surgeon, was just as revered in his field. To the world, they were the embodiment of American success. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Subtle at first, like a hairline fracture on glass. Sunny noticed Emmanuel had been acting differently for months. Longer hours, hushed phone calls, sudden trips out of state with no clear reason. She chalked it up to the pressures of medicine, until one cold February morning changed everything. At precisely 6:17 a.m., federal agents raided their home. Sunny was in the kitchen pouring coffee when she heard the knock. Loud, commanding. Before she could process, agents flooded in with bulletproof vests marked FBI and IRS CAD. Emmanuel, still in pajamas, was immediately handcuffed in front of their teenage children. Dr. Emmanuel Hostin, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and violations under the RICO Act involving an estimated $450 million, the lead agent announced. Sunny froze, mug slipping from her hand and shattering on the tile. This has to be a mistake, she cried. But the agents were firm, their body cameras blinking red. The news exploded across the nation within hours. Headlines blazed. Breaking, Sunny Hostin's husband arrested in $450 million fraud scheme. RICO charges filed against prominent New York surgeon. The View co-host faces financial collapse amidst legal storm. ABC issued a statement by noon. We are aware of the developing situation involving Sunny Hostin's family. We are giving her space and time as the matter unfolds. Her co-hosts on The View were stunned. Joy Behar reportedly broke down backstage. Whoopi Goldberg offered her support, but producers were already panicking about the PR fallout. Ratings were gold when scandal hit others, but not when it involved one of their own. Sunny's lawyer, a stoic woman named Karen DeLuca, met her the next morning. Sunny, this is very serious. Emmanuel is accused of being one of the key operatives in a multi-state medical investment fraud ring. Sunny blinked. Medical investment fraud? Karen nodded grimly. They promised investors returns in a healthcare startup called Medgenix. But the company didn't exist. It was a shell. They used fake documentation, false clinical trial reports, even ghost patients. $450 million was siphoned from retirement funds, pensions, and even cancer charities. Sunny's face went pale. My God! And there's more. They're invoking RICO statutes. That means racketeering. The feds believe this was an organized conspiracy involving lawyers, bankers, and yes, possibly even you. Sunny nearly vomited. Me? I had no idea, Karen, I swear on my life. I believe you, Karen said. But they're going to look at every dollar you've spent, every joint account, every home, car, vacation. If any of that money came from the fraud, you could be liable under RICO forfeiture laws. That night, Sunny sat alone in her den. The walls of her carefully built world were collapsing. The IRS froze their accounts. Luxury cars were seized. The DA's office filed motions to seize their second home in Martha's Vineyard. Her producers called. You're on indefinite leave. The next morning, the media camped outside her gates. Paparazzi buzzed drones over her yard. Online trolls turned vicious. The woman America once adored was now under siege. The arrest was only the beginning. As days turned into weeks, the Hostin family found themselves entangled in a labyrinth of legal battles, media scrutiny, and mounting financial collapse. The once pristine life they had worked so hard to build seemed to unravel with every passing hour. The press coverage was relentless. Sunny Hostin's husband in $450 million RICO fraud scandal, is she complicit? A headline screamed. News outlets dove into every detail of Sunny's life, looking for any possible link to the scheme. They highlighted her lavish lifestyle, her connections, and the high-profile charity events she had attended with Emmanuel. Behind closed doors, the tension in the Hostin household was palpable. Emmanuel, who had always been a confident and calm figure, was now a shadow of himself. He had been charged with conspiracy to defraud investors, wire fraud, and money laundering. His name was now synonymous with one of the largest medical fraud cases in history. He sat in their living room in silence, his face drawn and pale, while Sunny was left to hold the pieces of their shattered life together. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything?" Sunny asked him one night, her voice trembling. Emmanuel avoided her gaze. "I didn't know it would go this far. I was just trying to help. I thought I could make things work. I didn't realize how deep I was in until it was too late." Sunny felt a rush of anger. "You didn't realize? You didn't know that you were defrauding people, destroying lives for a quick buck?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "Do you know how many families lost their savings because of you? Do you realize how many lives you've ruined?" Emmanuel lowered his head in shame, unable to offer any answers. But for Sunny, the betrayal was more than just the financial fallout. It was the realization that the man she had spent nearly 2 decades building a life with had kept a dark secret from her. The trust they had once shared was gone. As the weeks passed, the legal situation became more dire. Sunny's lawyer, Karen DeLuca, worked tirelessly to defend her, but the evidence against Emmanuel was overwhelming. Witnesses came forward describing how Emmanuel had been involved in the fraudulent activities, signing off on falsified documents and participating in the scheme to siphon money from unsuspecting investors. The federal government was building a case that could send him to prison for decades. But the legal issues weren't the only problems they faced. The financial strain was growing worse by the day. With their accounts frozen and assets seized, Sunny and Emmanuel were left with nothing. The IRS began investigating every penny they had earned in the past 10 years, and the banks were calling in their loans. The Hostin's financial empire was crumbling, and they were left with the harsh reality of bankruptcy. Their once lavish lifestyle, filled with luxury vacations, designer clothes, and a sprawling mansion in the suburbs, was now out of reach. Their primary residence, which had once been a symbol of their success, was now up for sale. Even their prized collection of vintage cars was being auctioned off to settle their debts. Sunny, who had always been the face of poise and professionalism, found herself in a constant state of panic. She was no longer in control of her own life. Every phone call, every email, every knock on the door was a reminder of the financial collapse that was rapidly taking over their existence. Her career, which had once been the pinnacle of success, was now on the line. The View was under pressure from advertisers and stakeholders to distance themselves from the scandal. The producers, who had once been her closest allies, were now carefully monitoring her every move, knowing that any slip-up could cost them viewers. "Sunny, we need to talk," the show's executive producer, Mark, said one day, calling her into his office. "The network is concerned. Your image is being tarnished by the scandal. We can't have this affecting the ratings. The public is losing trust." Sunny, her heart racing, sat across from him, trying to maintain her composure. "Mark, you know I have no involvement in this. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just as much a victim as anyone else." "I know, Sunny," he said, his voice sympathetic but firm. "But the truth doesn't always matter to the audience. They want answers, and they want them now." Sunny's mind raced as she tried to process what he was saying. "So what are you suggesting?" Mark hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We're going to have to take a break from the show. At least until this blows over. You need to focus on clearing your name and rebuilding your reputation." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Take a break? Her entire career, everything she had worked for, was being put on hold. The idea of stepping away from the public, I felt like a death sentence. But what other choice did she have? The decision to take a break from The View hit Sunny harder than she expected. She had spent years crafting her public persona, an intelligent, witty, and compassionate woman. To step away, to be sidelined by a scandal she had no part in, felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything she had worked for. But even worse, it felt like the end of her personal identity. Sunny Hostin was no longer just a media personality. She was now a woman caught in the crossfire of a federal investigation, with her entire life hanging in the balance. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of her life. While Emmanuel sat at home under house arrest, facing the looming possibility of a prison sentence, Sunny tried to put on a brave face for their children. Mega, their teenage daughter, was struggling in school. The bullying from classmates had reached an all-time high. She was no longer just the daughter of a popular television personality. She was now the daughter of a man accused of defrauding millions. Her son, Elijah, was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the change. The once joyful home now felt like a house of sorrow. Laughter was replaced by the sound of clicking keyboards and late-night phone calls from lawyers. But despite the chaos, Sunny knew she had to stay strong for them. She had always been the rock of the family, the one who held everything together, and now she had to be stronger than ever. She threw herself into managing the fallout, hiring crisis PR experts to control the narrative and work to clear her name. But nothing seemed to work. Every press release, every interview only made things worse. The media was relentless and no amount of damage control could reverse the damage already done. Her name, once synonymous with grace and dignity, was now linked to fraud and scandal. People no longer viewed her as the trusted voice on The View. They saw her as the wife of a criminal. Sunny spent hours reading the court documents, trying to make sense of the charges against Emmanuel. The RICO Act was a complex and severe federal law that carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The government was painting a picture of a well-orchestrated fraud scheme involving multiple players across various industries, with Emmanuel at the center. The more she read, the more she realized how deep the hole was. Emmanuel's defense was weak. He had never intended for things to go this far, he claimed. He was just a willing participant who trusted the wrong people. But the evidence was damning. Bank records, wiretaps, and emails all pointed to his direct involvement in the fraud. As the court date approached, the pressure on Sunny mounted. She had to decide whether to stay by her husband's side or distance herself to protect her own career and reputation. One evening, as Sunny sat at her desk, staring at a pile of legal papers, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Emmanuel. "I never meant for this to happen. I love you and the kids more than anything. Please don't let this ruin you. You deserve better than this." Her heart wrenched. The man who had been her partner, her confidant, her soulmate, was now a shell of himself. He was broken, ashamed, and terrified. She knew that his words were genuine, but they didn't change the reality of their situation. Could she continue to stand by him, knowing what he had done? Could she live with the public humiliation, the loss of her career, the financial ruin? The decision was tearing her apart. At the same time, there was a growing sense of betrayal among the people who had once been close to her. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone had an opinion on what she should do. Some told her to leave Emmanuel, to protect her children and her future. Others told her to stand by him, to fight for her family. Sunny wasn't sure what the right answer was. All she knew was that every day felt like a battle. The once perfect life she had built was now a shattered illusion. Her attorney, Karen DeLuca, had been the only constant through this ordeal. "Sunny, we're doing everything we can, but the truth is, this case is moving fast. You need to start preparing for the worst," Karen told her one afternoon. "Prepare for the worst?" Sunny repeated, her voice heavy with disbelief. "What do you mean?" "I'm saying that the RICO charges are serious. And if Emmanuel gets convicted, he could be facing years in prison. The financial impact on you will be devastating. You need to start thinking about how to protect yourself and the kids." "Protect myself?" Sunny echoed. "You mean from the media, from the court case? Or do you mean protect myself financially?" "Both," Karen said gently. "This will affect everything. Your career, your finances, your reputation. You've built an empire, but it's all at risk now." Sunny hung up the phone, her mind spinning. She had always prided herself on being a fighter, but now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she could win this battle. The weight of the situation was suffocating. Every corner of her life was being scrutinized, her every move dissected by the press, the courts, and the public. She had become the woman who could do nothing right, the woman whose perfect life had crumbled in a matter of weeks. And as the media frenzy continued to grow, Sunny faced an agonizing choice: stand by her husband and risk everything, or walk away and try to rebuild what was left of her shattered world. Sunny had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. This wasn't a simple career setback or a minor scandal. This was a full-blown crisis that threatened everything she had worked for. Yet, amidst the chaos and the legal battles, Sunny found a spark of determination. She wasn't ready to give up. Not on her family. Not on herself. It was her children who kept her going. Megha, still reeling from the social fallout at school, needed her mother now more than ever. Sunny could see the toll the scandal had taken on her daughter. The whispers in the hallway, the stares from classmates. Megha felt like a pariah, someone marked by the mistakes of others. And Elijah, too young to fully understand what was happening but old enough to sense the tension at home, needed to feel secure, to know that things would be okay. Sunny had to keep moving forward for them. But the more she thought about Emmanuel's betrayal, the more torn she became. It wasn't just about what he had done to her, it was about what he had done to their children, their reputation, and their future. The anger she felt towards him wasn't just about the financial ruin, it was the fact that he had dragged them all into this nightmare without ever giving her a choice. But despite the resentment, Sunny knew she couldn't just abandon him. Emmanuel was still her husband, the father of her children, and she had loved him for years. Walking away wasn't as simple as it seemed, especially with the court cases ahead and the possible years of prison time he was facing. As the trial loomed closer, Sunny's resolve grew stronger. She began taking steps to separate herself from the scandal without abandoning her family. She started working with her lawyers to distance herself from Emmanuel's financial dealings, insisting on full transparency to prove that she had no part in the fraud. She wanted to protect her career, her reputation, and her children's future. Her attorney Karen had warned her repeatedly about the risk of association. The more you stay connected to this, the more your career will suffer. The public isn't going to forgive Emmanuel's actions quickly, and that backlash will likely hit you too, Karen said during one of their many meetings. Sunny had spent hours reading through contracts and negotiating with the View's producers, trying to figure out how to rebuild her image. But every offer seemed tainted. The network had hinted at bringing her back, but only if she could prove she had cleaned up the mess. It was clear they weren't just looking for someone who was innocent, they needed someone who had suffered, someone who had been wronged. She considered giving an exclusive interview to one of the major networks to tell her side of the story. But the more she thought about it, the more she hesitated. Telling the truth would involve revealing her personal pain, her betrayal, and the deep wounds she felt. And could the public, after all this, still care about her? She didn't know. The court case began, and the legal process dragged on, punctuated by headlines in the tabloids. Sunny Hostin's husband faces 30 years in prison in $450 million RICO case. The pressure from the media only intensified. They dug into Emmanuel's past, his business ventures, his partners, all of it. And slowly, they started to piece together the full extent of the fraud, painting him as a mastermind. Sunny was accused, even by some critics, of turning a blind eye, of living in a world of privilege and luxury while her husband engaged in criminal activities. But nothing was further from the truth. Sunny knew she had never once been involved in her husband's business dealings. She had always kept her career and personal life separate from Emmanuel's business, believing in the importance of their individual pursuits. She had built her career on her own merit, and the idea that she could be linked to such a scandal simply because she had stood by her husband was maddening. As the trial continued, Sunny tried to focus on rebuilding her life, but every move felt like a step into quicksand. Her lawyer suggested she start looking at damage control for her career. Public opinion is fickle, Karen had said. You can't just hope this blows over. You need to take action, be visible, and start over. It was during one of these dark days that Sunny received a surprising offer. An old colleague, someone she had known since her early days in the industry, called her with an opportunity that would shift the course of her life. "Sunny, I know what you're going through, and I want to help," her colleague said. "We've got an opening for a new show, something different. Something that could allow you to rebuild your reputation from the ground up." It wasn't much of a lead, but for the first time in weeks, Sunny felt a flicker of hope. She was being offered a chance to rebuild on her own terms, not as the woman behind Emmanuel, but as her own person. It was a long shot, but it was a shot nonetheless. At the same time, Emmanuel's legal team was working overtime, attempting to reach a plea deal with the government. The evidence was overwhelming, but the stakes were high. If Emmanuel were to be convicted on all counts, the financial and emotional repercussions for his family would be devastating. They could lose everything. Emmanuel, still under house arrest, faced the grim possibility of spending the next 2 decades of his life in prison. He hadn't been a bad man, he had simply made a series of mistakes, one that spiraled out of control. But the consequences of those mistakes were clear, and they could not be avoided. Sunny sat by her phone one evening, waiting for the call. She had a feeling that the end was near, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. The weight of the past months had taken a toll on her body and mind. She had been strong for so long, but there were moments when even she couldn't keep the tears at bay. When the phone finally rang, it wasn't the call she had been expecting. It wasn't the news of a plea deal or a last-minute miracle, it was the call that would change everything. The call that Sunny received that night was not the news she had hoped for. It was worse. Emmanuel's legal team had failed to secure a plea deal, and the court was preparing to move forward with the trial. The stakes were now higher than ever. If Emmanuel were convicted, the consequences for both him and Sunny could be catastrophic, not just in terms of financial ruin, but also in terms of their family's future. Sunny stared at her phone, her heart racing. Her mind swirled with a million thoughts, fear, anger, helplessness, but amid it all, there was a surge of resolve. She had always been someone who faced adversity head-on, and she was not about to stop now. The situation was dire, but it was far from over. There was still time and she could still fight. She had come too far in her career, her personal life, and her fight for justice to give up now. The trial might have been a devastating blow, but it wouldn't define her. What defined her was her strength, her will to survive, and her commitment to her family. And as painful as it was, Sunny knew that she couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. She had to step into the ring and fight for everything she had left. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and legal battles. Emmanuel's trial had begun, and the press was everywhere, waiting for any hint of drama, any twist in the story. Sunny spent most of her time at the courthouse, sitting quietly through the hearings, observing every detail. The evidence was overwhelming, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal each time she saw Emmanuel in the courtroom. This wasn't the man she had married, the man she had once trusted with everything. As the days turned into weeks, Emmanuel's defense team scrambled to build a case, but the evidence continued to stack up against him. Despite his pleas of innocence, the prosecution's case was airtight. The wiretaps, the financial records, the testimony from former associates all pointed to his involvement in the massive fraud scheme. The more she heard, the more it became clear that the life they had built together was unraveling before her eyes. Despite everything, Sunny continued to stand by him. It was a decision that cost her dearly, both personally and professionally. Her reputation had taken a severe hit, and offers for her return to television were dwindling. But she wasn't just fighting for her career anymore. She was fighting for her family. She was fighting for her children's future. One evening, after a particularly difficult day in court, Sunny sat alone in her living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The quiet of the room felt deafening. She thought about how much she had sacrificed to be with Emmanuel, how she had believed in their life together. The love they had shared seemed so distant now. Was it worth it? Was the pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation worth it? But as she sat there, a realization began to form. The pain she was feeling wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something new. She wasn't going to let this define her. She wasn't going to let this scandal be the story of her life. She was going to take control of her narrative. The next morning, Sunny did something she had never done before. She reached out to her old network, the people who had once believed in her talent and her work ethic. She made a bold move, asking if there was a possibility for a return to television, not as a victim, not as someone who had been caught in a scandal, but as a woman who had survived it. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. She couldn't sit in the shadows forever. It was time to face the world once again. The response was swift. There was a new opportunity on the table, an interview special where Sunny could tell her side of the story. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. She could finally speak the truth. Finally show the world who she really was, not the woman they had assumed her to be. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to rebuild. As Emmanuel's trial continued, Sunny found herself in the spotlight once more. But this time, it was on her own terms. The special interview aired, and it was more than just a chance to clear her name. It was her chance to show the world her resilience, her strength, and her determination. The viewers, many of whom had been critical of her throughout the scandal, saw a different side of Sunny. She wasn't the woman they had thought she was. She wasn't the wife of the criminal. She was a woman who had been through hell and come out stronger on the other side. Emmanuel, for his part, was eventually convicted. The sentence was harsh, and his life as he had known it was over. But Sunny didn't let his fate be hers. She kept moving forward, not as the person the media had painted her to be, but as a woman who had refused to let one mistake define her. She was a mother, a fighter, and an individual with her own story to tell. As the months passed, the dust began to settle. The public's perception of Sunny began to shift. People saw her for the first time as a woman who had been tested and had survived. Her career started to rebuild, slowly but surely. New opportunities came her way, interviews, speaking engagements, and even a book deal. The book, which would chronicle her rise to fame, the betrayal, and her path to recovery, became a bestseller. It wasn't just her story, it was a story of survival, of resilience, and of finding the strength to rise from the ashes. Sunny Hostin had been through the darkest period of her life, but she had come out on the other side stronger than ever. Her journey had been painful, but it had led her to a place of peace. She had learned that no matter how far down you fall, there is always a way back up. And with every step forward, she proved that she was more than just the sum of her struggles. She was a force to be reckoned with.